This is my true story. When I was young, I worked day and night to give my son a good life. I thought he would grow up and respect me. I thought he would hold me up when I was old. But I was wrong. One night, after a fight, he kicked me down the stairs. He kicked me again and again, 5 times, until I could not rise. And he stood above me, laughing. My pain was deep, but my will was stronger. What I did next changed everything. Before that, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. And subscribe. I was not born into money. I was born into work. My hands grew hard before I even turned 10. Every day, I carried bricks, chopped wood, cleaned fields, and lifted more than my body could handle. My life was not easy, but I never complained. I told myself, if I work now, my son will live better. That hope became my reason to keep going. Day after day, I saved money from little jobs. I worked in factories, I worked in farms, I worked in shops. My back bent, my legs hurt. But I told myself, this pain will become comfort for him. I built the family home brick by brick. I placed every stone thinking of the child who would one day call it his. When my son was born, I thought all my sacrifice was worth it. I looked at his small hands and told myself, I will give him the world. And I tried. I paid for his school fees even when I had to skip meals. I worked extra shifts just so he would have a new book, a clean uniform, and food in his stomach. When teachers called him lazy, I defended him. When neighbors doubted him, I said he was smart. I covered his mistakes, hoping he would learn. I took loans when he needed money. I sold land when he said he wanted a car. I even covered his debts when he gambled away his pay. Each time I told myself, he will grow up, he will change, he will remember my love and repay it with respect. When he got married, I paid for the wedding. I wanted him to start life happy. I handed him the keys to the house and said, this is your home too. I thought when I grew old, he would give me care. I thought when my steps became weak, he would hold my arm. I thought when my hands shook, he would bring me food with love. But I was wrong. My sacrifices became invisible to him. The house I built became his stage to mock me. The money I saved became the rope he tied around my neck. My kindness turned into his weapon. Still, for years I kept quiet. I kept telling myself, he will remember. One day he will look at me and see his father, not a burden. But that day never came. Instead, he grew crueler. Cruelty does not arrive all at once. It enters quietly, like a shadow at the edge of light. At first, my son's words were sharp but short. He called me slow when I could not keep up the stairs. He mocked my hearing when I asked him to repeat himself. He laughed when my hands shook as I tried to hold a cup of tea. These were small cuts, but they began to bleed inside me. I told myself, it is just his temper. He is tired. He will stop. But he did not stop. Soon the little jokes became open insults. He began calling me dead weight. When I sat at the table, he said I ate too much for someone who did not earn any more. He told his wife, old people should not sit in the center. She laughed, and I felt the floor under me crack. When I walked slowly to the market, he shouted at me for wasting time. When I dropped a glass, he cursed me as if I had broken gold. His voice grew louder, his respect grew smaller, and I grew quieter. One day, I heard him tell his friend, the old man is just waiting to die. That line cut deeper than any blade. I wanted to speak, but my throat was tight. I looked at the same son I once carried in my arms, the same boy I gave my strength to, and I saw a stranger who wore his face but not his heart. Neighbors noticed too. They asked me if everything was fine. I forced a smile and said, yes, my son is busy, that is why he is short-tempered. But inside, I knew it was not busyness. It was cruelty. It was disrespect that had grown into habit. I tried to win him back with patience. When he mocked me, I stayed silent. When he cursed me, I looked down. When he insulted me, I told myself, he will remember. But instead of remembering, he grew worse. Every day his tone carried less love and his eyes carried less care. He no longer saw me as a father. He saw me as a burden, an obstacle, something in his way. That was the first sign. And I ignored it. I thought love would heal it. But love cannot heal cruelty. It only feeds it. And by staying silent, I gave him power. Power he soon used to push me not just with words, but with his hands. Cruelty grew step by step, until one night it broke into violence that I will never forget. It was late evening. The house was quiet, but the silence carried weight. My son had been drinking. His voice was already sharp, his eyes red with anger. I sat at the table, eating slowly, my weak hands lifting bread that felt heavy. He walked in and slammed the door. His wife stood behind him, watching with the same cold look she often carried. He pointed at me and said, "Old man, you are useless. You do nothing but breathe air that does not belong to you." I lowered my head, hoping his storm would pass. But storms do not pass when they enjoy destruction. He asked me a question. I cannot even remember what. But before I could answer, he cursed me. He walked closer, his steps heavy, his face twisted with hate. I told him, "Do not speak like this to your father." Those words only made him angrier. His voice grew louder. His wife smirked. He shouted, "You think you are still someone? You are nothing. You cannot even walk straight." Then he pointed to the stairs. His anger was fire now, and I was dry wood. He pushed me once, a hard shove to my chest, and I stumbled onto the first step. My frail body could not hold balance. My knees bent, my arms flailed. I fell backward, crashing down the wooden stairs. Pain shot through my back, my head struck the edge, and the world spun. I lay there, breathless, my chest heaving, my body screaming. I thought it was over. But it was not. He walked down, grabbed me by the collar, and dragged me halfway up again. His grip was tight, his face close to mine. I could smell the alcohol, the rage, the cruelty. He spat words into my ear. "This is where you belong." On the ground, crawling. Then he pushed me again. My back hit the stairs, my arms twisted, my bones cracked against the hard edges. Pain spread through me like fire. But his laughter echoed louder than my cries. That was the second time. I tried to crawl away, my hands reaching for the floor, but he kicked me in the ribs. The breath left my body. I gasped, trying to hold on to life. He grabbed me again, yanked me upward, and forced me onto the steps. My old legs could not carry me, but he did not care. With a cruel grin, he shoved me down again. My head bounced against the wooden edges. My eyes blurred. I could not see straight. That was the third time. I begged, "Please, stop." But begging only fueled his cruelty. He enjoyed my pain. His wife stood at the top, her arms crossed, smiling faintly, as if watching entertainment. My son laughed, louder each time I fell. He dragged me up once more. My bones felt like glass. My breath was short. My hands shook as I tried to grab the railing. But he did not let me. He slammed me down with both hands on my chest, and I fell harder than before. My shoulder dislocated, pain exploded, and tears spilled down my cheeks. That was the fourth time. Now I could not rise. My body lay broken. My chest burned. My head was heavy. But he was not finished. He walked down slowly, grabbed my arm, twisted it until I screamed, and forced me up like a rag doll. I begged again, my voice cracked. "Son, please." But he only whispered, "You are not my father. You are dirt." Then, with all his strength, he shoved me one last time. My body tumbled like a sack of grain. I hit the bottom hard. My head struck the floor. I lay there, still, unable to move. That was the fifth time. I could hear his laughter above me. He stood at the top of the stairs, hands on his hips, looking down at me like a conqueror. His wife laughed with him. Their voices were sharp, cutting into my ears. I was gasping, unable to rise, unable to fight, unable to even cry. My body was swollen with bruises, my bones screaming. I felt the taste of blood in my mouth. My eyes stared at the ceiling, but all I saw was betrayal. The boy I once carried in my arms, the boy I once fed with my last piece of bread, had turned into my enemy. and he enjoyed every moment of my suffering. I thought of the nights when I held his small hand so he would not fall on these same stairs. I thought of the mornings when I tied his shoelaces before he went to school. I thought of the evenings when I gave him food while I went hungry. And now that same boy had pushed me down not once, not twice, but 5 times, until my body could not rise. The cruelty was not just in the pushes. The cruelty was in the laughter. The laughter that filled the house. The laughter that told me I was nothing but a toy for his anger. I lay there in the dirt of my own home, broken, humiliated, betrayed. I could not move. I could not breathe without pain. I could not believe that this was my son. That night, as I lay on the floor, staring at the ceiling, I felt my heart crack. But inside that crack, something else grew. Something stronger than pain. Something sharper than humiliation. Resolve. I lay at the bottom of the stairs, gasping for air, my body heavy and swollen with pain. My chest rose and fell slowly, each breath sharp like a knife inside my ribs. My head throbbed, my shoulder burned, my legs felt numb. The floor was cold against my skin, but the cold inside my heart was worse. Above me, I still heard laughter, my son's laughter, cruel and loud, the sound of victory over his own father. His wife joined in, her voice sharp, filled with delight at my pain. Their joy was built on my broken body. That was the deepest humiliation of all. I tried to move my arm, but it was twisted and weak. I tried to rise, but my legs shook and collapsed under me. I could not stand. I could not walk. I could only lie there, still, like trash thrown down a flight of stairs. My son looked down at me from the top, smirking as if he had won some game. He shouted, "Stay there. That's where you belong." His words cut deeper than the fall. In that moment, I remembered all the nights when these same stairs had been filled with love. When he was a boy, afraid of the dark, I carried him up step by step. My back was strong then, my arms steady. I held him close so he would not stumble. I whispered to him, "Don't worry, son, I will always carry you." My words were promise and truth. And now, the same boy, now a man, had pushed me 5 times down those same stairs, watching my body twist and break. The memory stabbed me like fire in my chest. Neighbors heard the noise and peeked through their windows, but no one came in. They saw me lying on the ground, my son standing tall above me. Some shook their heads, others turned away. I felt their pity, but I also felt their silence. They would whisper later, but in that moment, I was alone. Alone in pain. Alone in shame. I tried to speak, but my lips trembled. I whispered weakly, "Why?" But my son only laughed harder. His wife leaned against the railing, her arms crossed, her eyes filled with mockery. They looked at me not as a father, not even as a man, but as something beneath them. An old body, a broken thing, a piece of dirt. I wanted to cry out, but tears stayed inside me. Crying would not bring back the boy I had raised. Crying would not erase the cruelty I now faced. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Time lost meaning as I lay there. Pain blurred my thoughts, but humiliation kept me awake. I thought of how I once worked from sunrise to sunset to build this home, this very house with these very stairs. My hands had carried the bricks. My sweat had soaked the ground. Every wall, every corner was built with my sacrifice. And yet, in my own house, I was treated worse than a stranger, worse than an animal. I thought of meals long ago when food was scarce. I remembered splitting bread in 2, giving the larger piece to my son while I ate the smaller one. I remembered watching him grow strong while I grew thin, but smiling because I thought I was building his future. Now, that same son pushed me until my body was broken and my dignity shattered. The sacrifice of years turned into the weapon of humiliation. As I lay there staring at the ceiling, I felt shame cover me like a blanket. I could not move. I could not defend myself. My body was weak, but my heart hurt more. The humiliation was not in the pain, but in the betrayal. My own blood, my own child, had become my tormentor. His laughter echoed in my ears long after he left the stairs. His wife's smirk stayed in my eyes, even when I closed them. That night, as darkness filled the house, I stayed on the floor, too weak to climb up, too broken to rise. Every time I tried to move, pain stopped me. Every time I tried to think, humiliation dragged me down. I whispered to myself, why did I raise him like this? Why did I give everything? But there was no answer, only silence, silence heavy as stone. But in that silence, something began to change. As I lay humiliated, I began to feel something stronger than pain. I began to feel resolve. I realized humiliation can break the body, but it can also build the spirit. Lying there on the cold floor, I promised myself, this would not end in silence. This humiliation would not be the last page of my story. My son thought he had crushed me, but he had only awakened me. My son thought he had won. He thought by kicking me down the stairs again and again, by laughing at my pain, he had stripped me of everything. He believed that strength was in fists and feet, that cruelty was control. He believed that my silence was weakness. He thought because my body was frail, I had nothing left. But what he forgot, what he never cared to notice, was that true power is not in muscle, but in hands that hold the pen, in names that remain on deeds, in knowledge of truth, and in the law that stands above us all. Lying there broken, I still had the house in my name. I still had the bank accounts under my control. Every paper, every document, every signature was mine, not his. He thought I was just an old man lying helpless on the floor, but I was still the owner of the roof above his head. I was still the one who had built the life he lived in comfort. Without me, there was no inheritance. Without me, there was no future. But in his arrogance, he forgot all of this. He thought cruelty erased my worth. But in truth, it only showed his weakness. A real man builds. A real man respects. He was neither. He was a bully, feeding on the body of the very man who gave him life. And bullies forget one thing. The world has eyes. Neighbors had seen him push me. Relatives had heard his insults. He thought their silence meant approval, but their silence was fear. Their silence was pity for me, and their silence would soon become witness against him. I remembered the bank accounts. My name was still written there. He lived on comfort because I paid his debts, because I allowed him to use my credit, because I had bailed him out when he gambled his money away. Without me, he was a hollow man, living on borrowed dignity. He strutted through the neighborhood like he was powerful, but every step he took was built on foundations I created. The car he drove, I paid for. The clothes he wore, I bought in his youth. The roof he slept under, I built with my hands. The job he bragged about, I helped him reach by paying his way through school. He forgot the roots that fed his tree, and now he thought cutting me down would make him grow taller. But trees that cut their roots only rot. He also forgot the law. He thought violence was private. He thought humiliation would stay inside these four walls. He thought no one would believe me because I was old and weak. But law does not care for age, only for evidence. And I had it. I had bruises. I had scars. I had neighbors who had seen. I had relatives who had whispered about his cruelty long before this night. He believed fists erased truth, but fists only create proof. Every mark on my body was a story the law would read out loud. I thought of his job. He wore his smile in public, pretending to be a respectable man, shaking hands, laughing with friends, showing himself as a good son, a family man. But behind closed doors, he was a monster. He thought reputation was his shield. But I knew, when the truth came out, his mask would burn. I still had the power to rip that mask away. He forgot that the world judges cruelty harder than anything else. The same people who now praised him would spit on his name when they saw what he had done. I thought of inheritance. He believed everything I built was his by right. He thought because he was my son, my blood, he owned my future wealth. But blood alone does not make a man worthy. Respect does. Kindness does. He gave me none. And what he did not know was that wills can change. Papers can be signed. The wealth he thought was guaranteed could disappear into the hands of others. He forgot that one stroke of my pen could cut him out forever. That was the power he forgot. He thought humiliation killed me. But humiliation gave me strength. He thought violence silenced me, but violence gave me proof. He thought arrogance made him untouchable, but arrogance blinds a man to the truth. And the truth was simple. I still had control. I still had voice. I still had the law, the property, the inheritance, and the will. As I lay broken, I whispered to myself, "He thinks I am weak. But I am still the father. I am still the builder. I am still the owner. And soon he will see." That night, the pain in my body was sharp, but the fire in my heart was sharper. I realized that all along he believed cruelty gave him power. He was wrong. My silence was not weakness. It was patience. My frailty was not loss. It was disguise. True power is quiet, hidden until it is revealed. And when it is revealed, it destroys arrogance like fire destroys dry grass. He had forgotten all of this, but I had not. And soon he would learn. That night, as I lay in my bed with bruises all over my body, I stared at the ceiling and thought about everything that had happened. My ribs hurt when I breathed. My face still carried the marks of the fall. My legs felt weak, and my back ached as if the stairs had carved their pain deep inside me. But what hurt most was not the body. It was the soul. The betrayal of my own son burned hotter than any wound. I asked myself many questions. How could the boy I raised with love push me down like I was nothing? How could the child who once cried in my arms now laugh at my suffering? How could the son I gave everything to, food, shelter, clothes, money, even my health, turn against me in such a cruel way? I searched for answers, but all I found was silence. And in that silence, something began to grow. Not weakness, not tears, but strength, a decision. At first, I thought maybe I should forgive. Maybe I should let it pass. After all, he was my son, my blood, my flesh, my family. But then I remembered the sound of his laughter when I lay broken on the floor. I remembered the way his wife looked at me, smirking as if I was dirt. I remembered the neighbor's eyes, full of pity but silent as they turned away. I remembered lying at the bottom of the stairs, unable to move, feeling smaller than a shadow. And I realized, if I forgave, it would happen again. And next time, it might be the end of me. So I decided, no more silence, no more tears, no more suffering in the shadows of my own house. My son thought he had power over me. He thought his fists and his kicks could erase my dignity. But I knew the truth. I still had the law. I still had the papers. I still had the voice to speak, the proof to show, the power to fight back. My decision was clear. I would expose him. I would not die humiliated. I would live with dignity, and he would face the weight of his cruelty. I thought about what that meant. It meant standing against him in the open. It meant showing the world what he had done. It meant risking more humiliation if people did not believe me. But I looked at my bruises in the mirror. My face was swollen, my eyes red, my skin marked. And I told myself, this is not shame. This is proof every wound was a story. Every mark was a weapon. My body carried the evidence of his violence. And with that evidence, I could stand in front of the law. That night, I imagined the courtroom. I saw myself standing there, weak in body, but strong in spirit. I saw my son, the same man who had kicked me, standing there too, but not as a free man, as a criminal. I saw the judge looking at the bruises, listening to the story, hearing the witnesses. I saw the truth finally spoken out loud. And I knew. This was the only way. If I stayed quiet, I would remain broken. But if I spoke, I could rise again. My decision also meant cutting him off from my life. It meant no inheritance, no property, no house, no future from me. Why should cruelty be rewarded with wealth? Why should humiliation be repaid with comfort? Number. My love had raised him, but my love would not carry him anymore. My decision was not only to expose him, but also to erase him from the future he thought was his. I thought of my daughter, his sister, who still treated me with respect. I thought of charities, of people in need, of strangers who would value a kind hand more than my own son ever did. And I realized I had choices. My son thought the future was guaranteed to him because of blood. But I had the power to give that future to anyone. My decision was simple. He would not inherit cruelty, not from me. As the night stretched on, I felt my pain slowly turn into resolve. My tears dried, my hands stopped shaking. My mind became clear. The humiliation I had suffered on those stairs would not be my last chapter. It would be the beginning of his downfall. I whispered to myself in the darkness, "You think you are strong, my son. But soon, you will see true strength. And true strength is not in cruelty. It is in justice." That was the moment I decided. I would report him. I would go to the police. I would gather the evidence. I would show the world what he had done. I would change my will. I would strip him of everything he thought was his. My son had pushed me 5 times down the stairs until I could not move. But now I would stand. And I would make sure he could never stand proud again. The next morning, my body still hurt, but my mind was strong. I woke up with bruises all over me. My ribs ached when I moved. My back felt broken. My legs were weak. But none of this stopped me. I had already made my decision. I was done staying silent. I was done living in fear under the roof I built. That day, I was going to speak. That day, I was going to report him. I slowly dressed myself. Every movement was painful. I looked into the mirror and saw my face. Swollen. Blue and purple from the bruises. Cuts near my cheek. My eyes heavy from the fall. For a moment, I felt shame. For a moment, I wanted to hide. But then I reminded myself, this is not shame. This is proof. These bruises are not weakness. They are evidence. They are my shield. They are my sword. I walked out of the house. My son did not even notice. He thought I was too weak to go anywhere. He thought I would just stay quiet, like always. He was wrong. My legs trembled, but I kept moving. I held my walking stick and took step after step. I did not care how slow it was. I did not care how much it hurt. Every step was justice coming closer. When I reached the police station, I stood at the entrance for a long moment. My heart beat fast. My hands shook. I was scared. Scared they would not believe me. Scared they would laugh at me, the way my son laughed. But then I thought of those stairs. I thought of falling again and again. I thought of lying there, broken, while my son laughed from above. And the fear turned into fire. I pushed the door open and went inside. An officer looked up at me. His eyes narrowed when he saw my bruises. He asked me softly, "What happened?" For the first time in years, I spoke the truth. I said, "My son kicked me down the stairs 5 times. He laughed while I couldn't move. My voice shook, but I kept going. I told him everything, the insults, the cruelty, the years of silence, and finally, the fall that almost broke me." The officer listened. He wrote everything down. He did not laugh. He did not doubt me. He called another officer to look at my injuries. They asked me if I wanted to file an official report. My heart pounded. This was the moment. If I said yes, there was no turning back. I thought of my son's face when he laughed at me. I thought of his wife's smirk. I thought of the neighbor's silence. And I said, "Yes, I want to report him." They brought out papers. I signed them with shaking hands. Each signature felt heavy, but also powerful. For the first time in years, my voice was no longer trapped inside. My suffering had turned into action. My humiliation had turned into justice. The police asked if I had proof. I showed them my bruises. They took photographs of my face, my arms, my back. Each picture was another piece of evidence. Each picture told the story of cruelty without needing words. I also gave them the names of neighbors who had seen my son push me. I told them about relatives who had heard his insults. The officers wrote everything down. The file grew thicker with every detail. My son thought fists erased truth. But here, his fists had written the truth into law. They promised to investigate. They said elder abuse is a crime. They told me I had taken a brave step. I nodded. But inside, I was not thinking about bravery. I was thinking about revenge. I was thinking about the day my son would stand in front of the judge, stripped of his arrogance. I was thinking about the day the world would know what he really was. When I left the station, the sun felt brighter. My body still hurt, but my spirit felt lighter. For years, I carried silence like a heavy stone. That day, I dropped it. I felt free. My son did not know yet what I had done. He thought I was still weak. He thought he still owned me with fear. But he was wrong. The report was filed. The law was now on my side, and soon he would face the truth. That night, I sat in my chair and smiled for the first time in years. My son's arrogance had made him blind. He forgot that power is not in fists. Power is in truth. Power is in law. Power is in justice, and justice had already begun its work. The day of the court hearing finally came. I woke up early, my body still weak, but my heart strong. I put on the cleanest clothes I had. My hands trembled as I buttoned my shirt, but not from fear, from the weight of the moment. This was not just another day. This was the day the truth would no longer hide inside the walls of my house. This was the day my son would face the world for what he had done. As I entered the courthouse, the air felt heavy. People moved around me, lawyers in black coats, officers standing tall, families whispering in corners. My legs shook as I walked, but each step reminded me that I had survived worse. I had survived being pushed down the stairs 5 times until I could not move. I had survived humiliation. I had survived silence. Today, I was not silent anymore. The courtroom was large, with wooden benches and high walls. At the front, the judge sat behind a desk, serious and calm. To one side, my lawyer sat waiting. On the other side, my son sat with his lawyer. He looked different now, not arrogant, not smiling. His face was pale, his eyes restless. He shifted in his seat, avoiding my gaze. For the first time, I saw fear in him. The judge called the case. Everyone became quiet. My lawyer stood and began to speak. He told the story clearly. How I had been abused. How my son had mocked me. How he had kicked me down the stairs not once, but 5 times. He described my bruises, my swollen face, my broken body. He showed the photographs taken by the police. Each picture was passed to the judge. Each picture told the truth my son had tried to bury. Then, it was my turn. They asked me to stand and give my testimony. My legs trembled as I walked to the stand, but I held my head high. I spoke slowly, clearly, using the simplest words, because truth does not need fancy language. I told the judge everything. The years of insults, the laughter, the humiliation, and finally, the night when he pushed me down the stairs again and again until I could not move. My voice cracked at times, but I kept going. I said, "This is my son. I fed him when I was hungry. I carried him when he was small. I gave him everything. And this is how he repaid me, by kicking me down like garbage." The courtroom was silent. Every ear listened. Every eye watched. The judge nodded. He asked questions. I answered with honesty. I showed my scars. I pointed to the photographs. I pointed to the truth. Then it was my son's turn. His lawyer tried to twist the story, tried to say I had fallen by accident, tried to say I was confused because of age, tried to paint me as weak in mind. But the judge was not blind. The photographs, the police report, the medical records, and the witness statements from neighbors spoke louder than lies. My son shifted in his seat, sweating, stuttering when asked direct questions. His arrogance was gone. The same mouth that once laughed at my pain now trembled in fear. I watched him, and I felt no pity. This was the same man who stood above me as I lay broken, laughing while I cried. This was the same man who thought he was untouchable. Now, in front of the judge, he was nothing. His pride had melted into shame. His voice had become small. His future hung by a thread, and I was the one holding the scissors. The judge looked at him sternly. The judge said that violence against the elderly is a serious crime. The judge said that children who harm their parents bring disgrace not only to themselves but to the whole community. The judge said my son's cruelty had been proven. His words echoed through the room. My son lowered his head. When the verdict was read, my heart pounded. The judge declared him guilty of abuse, guilty of violence, guilty of cruelty. My son was sentenced. He was no longer free. He was no longer powerful. He was no longer the man who could laugh at me. He was now a criminal. As officers placed handcuffs on him, I watched carefully. I saw the same hands that once pushed me, once kicked me, now bound in chains. I saw his eyes dart around the room, searching for help, but finding none. His wife sat frozen, her face pale with shame. The neighbors whispered in the back of the courtroom, their heads shaking. Relatives looked away, embarrassed. The proud son was gone. What remained was a broken man exposed in front of everyone. When I stepped out of the courtroom, the air felt lighter. My body was still weak, but my spirit was tall. I had faced my tormentor. I had spoken the truth. I had turned humiliation into justice. The same stares that once held my pain were now a symbol of his downfall. I whispered to myself as I walked away, "You thought you could push me down forever. But today, I stood in court, and today, I exposed you." After the courtroom, life changed for both of us. For me, it was like a weight lifted from my shoulders. For him, it was like the ground opened under his feet. The judgment had been spoken. The truth was now public, and nothing could erase it. My son, who once stood tall with arrogance, now walked in chains. He was no longer feared. He was no longer respected. He was now the man who kicked his old father down the stairs, and everyone knew it. When we left the court, the police took him away. Neighbors were outside, waiting, whispering. Some shook their heads. Some spat on the ground when they saw him. Others looked at me with pity, but also with respect. The same neighbors who once stayed silent when they saw him humiliate me now looked at him with disgust. They would no longer greet him with smiles. They would no longer shake his hand. He was finished in their eyes. At his workplace, the news spread like fire. His colleagues who once laughed with him, who once praised him, now avoided his name. His boss had no choice but to remove him. No company would keep a man guilty of beating his old father. His pride, his income, his respect, gone in a single day. He had thought fists made him powerful, but fists had turned him into a prisoner and a beggar. Even at home, things changed. His wife, who once smirked when he mocked me, now hid her face. She could not bear the whispers of neighbors. She could not bear being known as the woman who laughed when a father was beaten. Relatives stopped visiting them. Friends cut ties. The house that once held parties and laughter now echoed with silence and shame. My son's world collapsed, not by accident, but by truth. And me? I walked with my head higher than before. My body was still weak, but my dignity had returned. When people looked at me, they no longer saw a broken old man. They saw someone who had spoken against cruelty. They saw someone who had turned humiliation into justice. They saw strength, not weakness. That was the true fallout. His cruelty had destroyed him, but it had rebuilt me. Days turned into weeks, and every day he sank deeper. In prison, his arrogance meant nothing. There, he was not the man with power. He was just another criminal. He had to live with the whispers of other inmates, with the shame of being known as the son who kicked his father. Outside, his name was ruined. No one trusted him. No one respected him. No one wanted to help him. Relatives spoke of him with disgust. How could he do that to his father? They asked. They remembered the times when I had paid his debts, when I had covered his mistakes, when I had sacrificed so he could stand tall. Now they saw him for who he was, not a man, but a coward. His arrogance had turned into begging. His pride had turned into silence. He tried to reach out to me. Letters came, written in shaky hands. Letters filled with excuses, with false apologies, with promises to change. But I did not answer. I had answered with my silence all my life, and that silence had given him power. Now, silence was my revenge. Every unanswered letter was a reminder that his cruelty had cut him off from me forever. The whispers in the town grew louder. People said, The father stood strong, the son fell weak. Others said, "That old man carried his son for years, and in return, the son tried to break him." But in the end, the son broke himself. The story spread beyond my street, beyond my town. His name was ruined, but my story gave courage to others. I was not the only one. Other fathers, other mothers, they too suffered in silence. And when they heard what I had done, some of them stood up too. My decision had not only changed my life, it had lit a fire in others. For me, the fallout was freedom. For him, the fallout was chains. He had lost everything: his respect, his job, his future, his friends, his family, his pride. All because he thought cruelty was strength. He had forgotten that cruelty only builds weakness. Every night as I sat in my chair, I thought of him in his cell. I pictured the walls around him, the iron bars, the silence of prison. I imagined him sitting there, alone, replaying the moment he kicked me, replaying the sound of his own laughter. Did he laugh now? Number. He begged, he wept, he regretted. But regret came too late. The fallout was not just his downfall, it was my rise. From humiliation, I had risen. From pain, I had found dignity. From silence, I had found voice. The stairs where I once lay broken had become the place where my strength began. And the courtroom where I once trembled had become the place where I stood tallest. That was the fallout. The son who mocked became the beggar, and the father who was broken became the victor. After everything, I finally found peace. My body was still weak and my steps were still slow, but my heart was free. For the first time in many years, I could sit in my chair without fear. I could breathe without shame. I could sleep without waiting for insults or kicks. Justice had come, and it had come through me. I had spoken. I had stood in court. I had shown the world the truth, and the truth had crushed the arrogance of my son. When I walked outside now, neighbors greeted me with respect. They looked at me with pride, not pity. They said, "You were brave. You stood up." Their words gave me strength. They no longer whispered behind my back. They no longer looked at me as the old man who was broken by his son. They looked at me as the father who fought back, as the father who proved that cruelty cannot hide forever. That was my justice, to be seen again as a man of dignity. I knew my son was still in his cell. I pictured him there every night, his head down, his pride gone, his hands chained. He used to laugh at me when I lay broken at the bottom of the stairs. He used to call me weak. He used to call me worthless. Now the whole world saw who was worthless. His laughter had turned into silence. His pride had turned into begging. And all because I had chosen to stand. That was my justice. To watch the same man who mocked me now rot in shame. My justice was not just about me. It was about the message. I wanted others to know, silence is not the answer. Fear is not the answer. We who are old still have power. We who are weak in body still have strong voices. We who are mocked still carry truth. And truth, when spoken, can bring down even the strongest of bullies. My case was proof. My story was proof. That was my justice, to become the voice for others who suffered like me. I thought of my daughter. She still cared for me. She still called me father with respect. She visited me, brought me food, sat with me, and listened to my words. She said, "Father, I am proud of you." Those words healed wounds deeper than bruises. My son had taken away my dignity for a time, but my daughter had given it back with her love. That was my justice, to see kindness in one child when cruelty lived in the other. I also thought of my house, my land, my wealth. For years, my son thought they were his future. He thought he would inherit everything. He thought he could kick me, insult me, mock me, and still one day take it all. But he was wrong. I had changed my will. His name was gone from every paper. His future was erased with one signature. He would inherit nothing but shame. And that was my justice, to know that all I built would never belong to cruelty. Sometimes at night I remembered the falls. I remembered the stairs. I remembered the pain. I remembered lying there, unable to move, hearing his laughter. The memory still hurt. But then I remembered the courtroom. I remembered standing tall, pointing at him, speaking the truth. I remembered the judge's voice declaring him guilty. I remembered the sound of handcuffs closing around his wrists. And suddenly, the pain turned into power. The humiliation turned into victory. That was my justice, to transform suffering into strength. I lived the rest of my days in quiet dignity. I planted flowers in my yard. I sat under the tree I once planted when my children were small. I listened to the wind, the birds, the silence. No insults, no kicks, no humiliation, just peace. My son lived in chains, his name cursed by neighbors, his pride destroyed by truth. That was my justice. Peace for me, prison for him. In the end, I learned something simple but powerful. Blood does not guarantee love. A child is not a blessing if he becomes your tormentor. Respect is greater than blood. Kindness is greater than inheritance. And justice, though slow, always comes. My son forgot this, but I remembered, and I acted. That was my justice. So I say this to anyone listening. If you are humiliated, do not stay silent. If you are hurt, do not hide. Stand, speak, use your truth. Because even if your body is weak, your voice can be strong. And when truth comes out, cruelty always falls. Always. He kicked me down the stairs 5 times until I could not move. He laughed at my pain. But I stood in court. I spoke the truth, and I exposed him. Now, I live in peace. And he rots in shame. Final thought. He tried to bury me in humiliation, but I buried him in justice. That was my revenge, and that was my freedom.